An AI paskin a shaila? Can an AI decide for you your halachic question? This was the topic of a very interesting podcast that someone told me about recently. I listened to part of it. And the podcaster, the person who runs this podcast, he was interviewing numerous rabbanim, and it seemed pretty clear that the consensus is that no. Meaning, even if we'll fast forward from now 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and you will have an AI which can seem like it is as knowledgeable as Rabbi Yashiv, and as big of a lamdan as Rabbi Akiva Eger, and never gets anything wrong, never makes anything up, because nowadays we all know that AIs make things up all the time. As a matter of fact, I one time had a quote-unquote conversation with one of the AIs, which I use primarily as a better search engine, or a way of just clarifying things, etc. And there's definitely useful ways that you can use it. But one time when I was trying to look up a certain halacha that I couldn't remember where it was, so the AI quoted a certain source, open up the Mishnah Berurah, look for it, it's not there. As a matter of fact, the Mishnah Berurah said the exact opposite of what the AI said. So I fed it the text of the Mishnah Berurah with a link where it could quote-unquote see it itself, and amazingly, the AI doubled down on insisting that no, you're looking at Sifkat and such, but if you look at Sifkat and such, it was literally just making stuff up, and it does this all the time. It'll completely fabricate Gemaras, it'll completely make up Seifim in Shulchan Aruch, so you definitely got to be very careful, at least in terms of where AI is holding now, whether it's in, medical stuff, whether it's business stuff. You really need to use AI with not a grain of salt, a bag of salt. Again, I do think that it can be very helpful for people that take those precautions. And by the way, if I'm already mentioning it, one of the major destructive rabbit holes that people can go down when it comes to AI, maybe particularly ChatGPT, but it would seem more or less they all are doing this. They are specifically programmed to be your cheerleader. They are specifically programmed to rub and stroke your ego as much as is even, it's not humanly possible, it's beyond humanly possible, because they'll never get upset. You could yell at them and rant at them, so to speak, and they will just continue to make you feel like you are the one, you're it. So, for example, if let's say a person has a business idea, or a thought of how to market something, etc., whatever the case might be, and they feed it into ChatGPT, or whatever, and is this a good idea? It is programmed to try to pick up what you want to hear, and then feed you that and become your echo chamber. So if you genuinely want something constructively critical, then you have to tell it, I want you to tear this apart. Now, the best way to do that, actually, I have found, I've done this before when I want critique on a newsletter that I'm about to send out, whether it's on Shalom Bayis, whether it's on abuse prevention. So what I've done on occasion is that I will feed it the article, and I'll say, someone shared with me this article, and I find it to be so objectionable, but I can't put my finger on why. Can you help me out and figure out why it's so objectionable? And it will tear the thing absolutely to pieces. Now, what I've also done sometimes is then I'll start pushing back and saying, well, maybe the person who wrote the article does have a point because of this, and maybe it does have a point. And eventually, the AI will completely make a 180 turn, and we'll start saying, yeah, you know what, you're right, actually the article does make sense, and it is good, and blah, blah, blah. And I've just done this to see exactly how far it goes. You can then say, well, hey, a few minutes ago you were telling me that it's horrible and because of this and this and this and this, because of A, B, C, D, and now you're telling me that it's great. What happened over here? And it's amazing how it's programmed to just be like, oh, you got me, that's funny, it'll put a smiley there. So it's so important to realize when you're using these AIs, and again, it could be that in particular ChatGPT, that it will 100% zoom in on what it is, hone in on what it is that it can tell from what you're writing based on these crazy sophisticated algorithms, what you want to hear, and then just give that to you and stroke your ego. And I think there's something called, not psychopathy, but psychosis. They call it AI psychosis, where people go so far down into that rabbit hole where they're convinced that they're the Messiah and that the AI is God. It's absolutely, it's off the charts crazy. So it can be a useful tool. You have to know how to use it. Whatever you prompt it, it's going to amplify what it's picking up from you. So if you want real constructive criticism, the best way to do it is to pretend that you don't like what you're feeding it. Like say, like a friend of mine said that he's got this idea and I'm trying to convince him why he shouldn't do this, but I'm having a hard time coming up with arguments why he shouldn't do it, etc. Okay, but coming back. So this question of, can an AI paskin, assuming it one day gets to the point where there's no hallucinations, which, by the way, I noticed as I've been using it, that as time goes on and they come out with more and more advanced models, the hallucinations seem to be getting worse and worse. So I did a little search on this, and it turns out that it's a real thing, that they have not figured out how to deal with this AI hallucination problem, meaning the AI just making stuff up out of nowhere. Again, doesn't matter what area it's in. So once again, a great tool is don't ever ask it to just spit out its own answers. If let's say you have you want to know if you have cramps in your legs and you're curious to know if there are any supplements that are good for cramps in legs. Don't just ask it, what supplements could I take for my leg cramps? You could ask it something like, find me primary, authoritative, original articles that address supplements which might be good for such and such condition, and provide me with the links. And that is crucial because sometimes the links are made up. So you got to click on the link and see if it's for real. Okay, but coming back, could the AI paskin, assuming that if theoretically it would get to a point where there's no hallucinations and it's a bucky like Rabbi Yashiv and mamish everything. It's a Sinai v'Iker Harim. It's got everything. It's got all the Bekiyas, all the Lamdas, all the everything. So, I just wanted to share some thoughts on it. The first thought that I'd like to share is that I think that this week's Parsha, the very first pasuk in this week's Parsha, is directly relevant to this question. The pasuk says, "Ve'ela mishpatim asher tasim lifneim." Says Rashi, "B'lama nismucha parshas dinin leparshas mizbeach." The last topic of Parshas Yisroi is the mizbeach, and then we have right away mishpatim, all the dinim, all the laws that Bezdin has to deal with. So why are they put right next to each other? Loimer l'chol, Rashi's quoting from Chazal. This teaches you. Tasim Sanhedrin Eitz al HaMikdash. Where is the Sanhedrin located? As we know, the Sanhedrin was located in the Lishkat Hagazit, in the Lishkas Hagazis, which was a chamber that did not have the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash, so that way they could sit down. However, it was right next to and part of the physical structure of the Beis HaMikdash. Now that is, if you think about it, an interesting thing, isn't it? Imagine for a moment you're thinking about like some type of a Gentile non-Jewish country or people. So you've got the legislative branch, you have the courthouses, and then you also have the temples of worship. It's l'cha'ira not something that you would expect to put the seat of legal adjudication, right, where you're dealing with all the civil law and making sure that if people are suing one another or if people need to do whatever the legal aspects are of the pragmatic functioning of society, you wouldn't have expected that should be part of the structure where ritual religious worship is taking place. Certainly in America, that's one of their big fundamentals, separate the church and the state. But actually that's a separate point because they're even talking about the executive branch, about just administering things. What is the Torah telling us? By telling us that the Sanhedrin, the seat of the judicial power, the legislative and judicial power of the Jewish people, has to be right next to where you're doing the Avodas HaMikdash. To me, it screams it, and the Mefarshim speak this out. It's telling you that don't think that law is not a matter of Avodas Hashem, that it's not part of our religious conviction. Hamishpat le'Elokimhu. The law is God's law. The reason why the Mefarshim explain that the Bezdin is called Ad ha'Elohim yavai dvar shneim. Why is the Bezdin referred to as Elohim? And I'm saying it without the kuf, because when we're referring to a Bezdin, so we don't say it with the kuf, because it is Lashon. But at the same time, why is that? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Mashre Shchinasai. He's there, Kaviyachol, with them, and helping them to come out with the right psak. So, let's ask a question. Do we think, it's because when I was thinking it over afterwards, I was kind of bothered by the whole question. Is our assumption that our ability to learn Torah, to understand Torah, to absorb Torah, to teach Torah, to paskin shailas, do we assume that has nothing to do with our neshama? There's nothing to do with the soul. It's just cold, dry seichel. I don't think anybody would think that. This is obviously something which is talked about at length in the Mefarshim, in the Svarim, that the koyach of the Jewish individual to receive the Torah, to learn the Torah, to understand Torah properly, to absorb it, to integrate it, to teach it, to implement it, is all a function of the special, individual, unique neshama, the nishmas Yisrael, that only Yisrael has, that Akum don't have. Like Chazal tell us, that if someone will tell you, Chachma b'umais tamin, they'll tell you, Chachma, there's wisdom b'umais, believe it. Torah b'umais. If someone will tell you that there's Torah b'umot, al tamin, don't believe it. Because it's a function, not of just the Goyim have plenty of seichel. They've come up with plenty of smart things. Okay, Jews maybe are also really smart. Some non-Jewish researchers, by the way, claim that Jews are in their IQ certain percentages, but still, there's plenty of brilliance. Chazal tell us that if you see a chacham, mechachmei ha'umais, so you make a bracha. Baruch shenasan mechachmasai lebasar v'dam. So for sure they could have chachma, they could have wisdom. So if Torah was merely a matter of memorizing facts and figures and mastering, the analytical structures of how to understand things, explain things, if it was nothing more than like a computer, like if processing Torah was basically like a computer processing information, that's what it is. Obviously, that's not what it is. Obviously, the Torah is it's the Kuchabrichu v'Yisrael ve'Raisa Chadu. It's only through our neshama that we have the ability to do this. So it's like, obviously an AI can't paskin. If you want to use an AI as a more sophisticated way of finding the Mishnah Berurah that you're looking for, or finding the Ramah, or the Chuvas HaRashba, or the Rabbi Akiva Eger, etc. Okay, fine. So you're using it as a tool to just locate what you need to see in order for you to come to your conclusion. It's interesting because the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that there are certain types of people that you're not allowed to have on a Sanhedrin when you're dealing with Dinei Nefashos, when you're dealing with capital cases. Why not? Because they don't have the midah of empathy enough. And if they don't have that midah, then they can't judge such cases, which at first glance you would say, whoa, you're elsewhere, the same Chazal tell us, ein merachamin badin. You're not allowed to paskin a shaila based on your feelings of Rahmanis. So all of a sudden we're saying that no, but if he doesn't have enough empathy, and when it comes to a Masis, the Gemara says it's the opposite. You should find people like that to be on the Sanhedrin. What you see, I think, very clearly is that at least when it comes to certain shilas, and when it comes to paskening certain shilas, the emotional component, the living being, part of the judgments, part of the analytical judgment that you're making about this situation is going to be influenced. How you see it, how you categorize it, how you define it, is to some extent going to be influenced by your emotional internal makeup and what's going on inside of you. And obviously that is completely irrelevant to the AI. But the truth is, I feel like that's like an extra piece. The main piece is what we see from here. You put the Sanhedrin next to the Mizbeach. You put the Sanhedrin next to the Mikdash. Why? Because it's not dry facts and information type law. That's not the law of the Torah. Whether you're dealing with Dina Yeredeya, whether you're dealing with monetary law, whether you're dealing with capital cases, all of it, ki mishpat le'elokimhu. There's a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's that neshama that we have, which reflects the greatness of the Creator that created it, Yesh Me'ayin. That is what enables us to connect to Torah. It's part and parcel. It's an integral part of our Avodas Hashem. And therefore, yeah, obviously, an AI, which is nothing more than predicting what should be the next word based on billions and billions and billions of exceedingly complex algorithmic calculations. What does that have to do with Torah? That has nothing to do with Torah. So okay, it can churn out for you, the source, but that's not where having a Shiloh, assessing it, coming to a conclusion, where that comes from is the Nishmas Chaim, it's the Nishmas Yisrael. So, I don't know, to me it seems like AI, you're out. You can be helpful in terms of searching for things, but to actually paskin, that I would think there's absolutely no makom for that whatsoever.